Hey, Think Community, welcome to this episode of Think Business. Looking forward to talking with Nahed Khairallah. Nahed, it's great to connect with you. Organized Chaos is the business, and today we're talking about HR. You're, going into companies and helping them with their HR needs, and there's a lot there. So I thought we could talk a little bit about kind of the foundation and first defining, because I think sometimes many people don't really know exactly what the HR role is. So kind of break down, why the HR role is so important within a company.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me, John.
Yeah,
And
thanks
I,
for being
lo- I love that opening question because, to your point, HR is one of those things where if you ask 10 different business owners or leaders, you'll hear different answers. There's
here. Right, you
some
get 12
overlap, but
different
there's
answers. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
a lot of times there's some things which are pretty common that people think of when they hear HR. Labor law compliance, payroll, benefits administration, hiring. Those are kind of some of the main things that usually happen on a day-to-day administrative level in HR. But HR specifically, for it to be effective and functional, it has to help the business achieve its outcomes and goals. That is the core mandate of HR. If it doesn't do that, then HR is nothing but a administrative back office function that you should really pay no attention to and maybe just outsource completely. Um, when I talk about HR to me is the enabler of business success. I call it the rocket fuel of business growth because any business needs to have its people stuff in order to grow effectively, or otherwise it'll be held back. And there's a lot of experiences that I have had with companies that have actually failed due to their people issues, not because of product market fit or financial trouble. They actually were able to crash their company to the ground because of bad decisions in terms of organization structure, who's doing what, which jobs are available, what skills are we hiring for, and other decisions of the sort. So
yeah.
that's, if you will, like my overall summary. It's a strategic function. It's helped to enable the business, give it that rocket fuel to grow, as opposed to just the back end stuff that people think of when they first think of HR.
Yeah, let's talk about the rocket fuel to grow. One of the
Yes.
things that I think is also rocket fuel that HR does have their hand in, for those that have HR and those that don't, should think about, you know, um, incorporating it into their business. If you're a smaller business, you can outsource HR today, which I think is great. Um, you have rocket fuel of HR, and then to me, there's a line of hiring, right? HR and hiring,
Yeah.
and hiring only great people, and great people that are the right fit for each role, because all of those people lead to, in some way, sales. And sales is also rocket fuel, because if you're not
Yes.
bringing in money into your business, then you can't open up your doors the next day, the next week, or the next year. And
Exactly.
so let's kind of talk about that continuum, because I think that's an important one.
No,
So
I agree.
when hiring, and there's two things. Like sometimes I see HR divisions be very kind of, black and white. These are the questions you can ask, and there's no room for like asking intuitive questions based on what somebody said. And then there's certain guidelines, some don't have it. Talk a little bit about the role that HR plays in hiring,
Yeah.
and also the where HR needs to kind of step aside and let intuition and guts and free flowing questions, within, obviously, appropriateness. Um, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's an amazing question. So, hiring, to your point, it is one of the core capabilities that any growing company needs to have because when you're small, every single person has an outsized impact on the overall success of the business. If you're a 20, 30 person company, one or two people can be detrimental to your success if they're the wrong fit versus they could be maybe that accelerator if they're the right people.
Correct. Right.
So that is very critical. I usually tell founders that you need Michael Jordans at every position. Generally
Correct. You
speaking,
do.
early
You
on, you
do.
do because otherwise, when you need that talent density, because you're dealing typically, and usually in the news we hear about all of these startups that have gotten these funding rounds and they've gone on to be like unicorn successes, but that's the 1%. The
Correct.
99% is not on that track. They have to do things on a bootstrapped level and different
Right.
different ways of doing it. But so it is a very important thing. Where does HR step in? HR is the coach and guide in the entire process. Meaning, one of the first things that HR should help do is, first off, walk the leadership team and founders through, why do we need to fill this role? What is its impact going to be on the business? And what is the impact if we don't fill the role? And why am I saying this? Because a lot of times startups get into they jump into the mistake of overhiring or pulling the trigger too quickly, assuming that anytime there's a problem, we throw people at it, it's solved. A lot of companies actually burn their entire cash flow over time because of overhiring, and that's why you hear about a lot of layoffs every now and then. But
because they haven't focused on the process; they focused on the people. They focus on the solution and not the problem. And if you really focus on, this is what I see when I go into companies. If you focus on the problem and fixing the problem, then that's a totally different thing than just throwing money at a potential solution that you think may work.
Exactly. So the first goal for HR, the first role HR plays in hiring, is to help the company and the founders and leaders to determine, okay, what is the role we're actually trying to fill? What is this person, whoever that is, what are they going to be doing here? What is the impact that we foresee from the business? What are the expectations, and how are we going to actually measure those things, just to understand whether this is going according to plan or not? Once that is determined, then you move into, okay, actually defining in detail what we call the job description, what are these roles, duties, responsibilities, and expectations of this role, and what is the ideal candidate profile that would fit these criteria. And when I say ideal profile, I definitely am not talking about, hey, this person needs to have X number of years of experience, because years of experience means nothing. It's the quality of the experience that matters. So basically, you help the team pretty much create that profile of the role and so forth. Then when you come into questions and all that, it's about determining, how do you evaluate for this role properly. This is a combination usually of, interview questions, skill testing, maybe behavioral assessment, whatever that is, and that could change from role to role because the requirements are different. Now,
here's my favorite. I want to pause you for a second.
Sure.
Here's my favorite interview question, and I've interviewed a ton of people. I'm a business coach, and I work. I'm a sales and business coach, and I do a lot of interviewing, and I'll do 15-minute interviews for my clients via Zoom. And here's my question. Here's my favorite question. Always has been my favorite question for a long time. After about 5 minutes, you ask the question, on a scale from 1 to 10, how badly do you want to fill in the blank? And it's amazing, because you want someone who's going to answer a 10 or above, a 20, it's like they're just driven from the inside out. And it's amazing at that point, people will say, I don't know, like a 5, a 6, so what I found was interviewing people, like, you may connect well with people. You may think they're great, their skill set's great. But when you really ask them questions that make them think and come from an intrinsic space, they will typically always answer it honestly.
Yeah, and I like that point. So look, interviewing has to be a combination of structured and unstructured, right? And things which are ingrained into the role itself and the skills and capabilities on the job. But there's also that part which speaks to the culture, the value, how things are, what kind of personality works in this organization, what kind of mindset thrives in this organization. And that's kind of what your question touches upon, right? You don't only want what the person in a very structured and thought out way they can operate, but also, hey, if impromptu they have to make a call or they need to think of something, what is the mindset that they actually go into by default? These are things that you definitely want to touch upon. And typically when I'm providing guidance on interviewing and selection, you want to look at not only if they can do the job, but how they can do the job and the way in which they work. Not only if they can get you the results you want, but the way how do they go about doing that? It's not only what we achieve, but how we achieve it. Because those two things have to come together for you to be able to say that this is a successful hire. So HR has to help the organization go through that entire funnel. But also when someone is hired, make sure that that role is actually set up for success and they're able to perform up to expectations, and they're given the resources, they're given the onboarding, they're given everything they need to actually be able to contribute, because there's nothing worse than getting the best person that you can, but then you're not set up to actually enable them to achieve what they were hired to achieve, which ends up actually being, an issue where there's turnover and there's other problems that could come up.
Where do people get it wrong? Where do they need to fix it? Setting people up. I mean, one of the things sometimes I see is, the companies that I work with or am exposed to, sometimes they just throw people in and, you spend all that time hiring and there's no onboarding, there's no training. So what role does HR play in making sure that the onboarding, the training is actually taking place? Because I think one of the things people that I hear a lot is, XYZ person started, but, I'm busy. I'm so busy. I don't have time to do X, Y, and Z. So there, in many cases, needs to be somebody orchestrating, like you're talking about, and following up and making sure that they're, inspecting what they expect, if you will. So what role does or should HR play?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when it comes to onboarding, and even a lot of HR type of activities and typical duties, is HR's involvement is always based on the company's expectations and its ability, its capacity, the management team it has, and so forth. If you have a management team that is capable and has the capacity to deliver the kind of onboarding that is needed, power to them. HR provides more of a support role. If HR is based on the company's need, is expected to have a more hands-on involvement, then the onboarding process has to be designed that way to take into account. Because sometimes what happens is, and this is also the fault of many HR people, is I've worked with hundreds of HR people of my career, and I'm one of them, but generally speaking, there's a tendency to take whatever template you have been used to at other companies and try to transplant it over to your current situation, whereas it might not be the best fit. So HR really has to customize the approach to based on what is needed for the job to be successful within a time frame which makes sense for them to, we call that the time to productivity from when someone is hired. So, hey, from day one up till do you want them to be up and running in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What's the expectation here? And I typically like to run an analysis of, okay, if you want, because a lot of times you will hear managers, to your point, is, we're too busy, we're running at, we're going at 200 miles an hour, we don't have time for this. But at the same time, you expect someone to jump in, hit the ground running, sink or swim kind of mentality, but they don't have what's needed. So, I like to do an analysis sometimes to sort of evaluate, okay, what is the time expenditure from a manager's perspective in terms of cost and lost opportunity versus the lost productivity, and see, hey, is there a significant gap here to the point where it justifies managers actually blocking more time for these things, or, hey, should HR step in, do a lot of the lion's share, and keep all the technical stuff to other people? So it has to be a custom designed program that works for everyone and achieves whatever outcome everyone is aligned to.
Yeah. All right. Good. Thank you for that. Let's talk about HR companies that don't have HR in them. In 30 seconds, tell the listener kind of why and the steps they need to take and why they need HR.
Yeah, definitely. So HR is necessary because it helps you manage the business of people, and people make companies successful. HR is there to guide and enable you how to do that right, take shortcuts, and not burn unnecessary money, and get to where you want to get to faster.
Yeah.
But you need HR in different ways throughout your growth, right? If you're a 20-person company, you don't need a full-time HR person. If you're a 50, 60-person company, yes, you should start going there. So the level of HR you need changes, but you do need to think of it from day one, because if you want to scale and grow, it is a core component of your strategy.
Yeah. Let's talk about scaling and growing different divisions within a company. Mm-hmm. You have, to me, everything is sales, right? In some fashion, everything is sales, everything is storytelling, everything is influence, everything is, there's an element to that. Clean messaging from the top down, managers to their team, salespeople to then message to, find the pain and then overlay solution. And so you talked a little bit earlier about, quality, and I'm a big fan of quality. And so when HR is looking at the full org chart of everybody within the company, how do you look at that? How should HR work in alignment with managers and with leaders to train up and make sure that they have the right people on the bus? And then how do you determine who's not in the right seats that you may have to put in the right seat or let go? Give me a 1-minute masterclass on that.
Yeah, definitely. So your organization structure should be a reflection of your company strategy and what I call your differentiating pieces of success. What is the added value that you bring as a company to your customers and so forth? If you're a product-led company, your product team cannot be buried 3 levels under the CEO, right?
Yeah.
And so forth. So the first thing HR needs to do is understand the business like any other business leader. Why? Because if you don't understand the business as much as the next leader, your colleague, you're not going to be able to add value. You will not understand what is going on in the company. If I don't understand what's going on in the company, I can't provide recommendations on the org structure. So that's the first prerequisite. When you understand the business strategy, where you're trying to go, what are your immediate goals today versus tomorrow, you look at, is this org structure actually able to deliver, and is it set up in a way in terms of reporting structures, processes, and people, right? To go to the last point that you mentioned, hey, do you have the right people, and how do you determine who should be upskilled, stay, or leave? Companies, when they're growing, there's a lot of change that happens. And a lot of times when companies hire, they hire for a specific job role. Whereas to enable flexibility, you need to hire for broad skill sets. Skills that are transferable from one place to the other. Now, if you're in a situation where you're considering whether a job is actually viable or not, you need to assess the requirements of the job today versus where you expect them to be 6 months from now, 12 months from now.
Yeah.
And is this individual actually capable, based on their performance or even other assessments, from actually getting there within the time you need them to get there? A lot of times, if this person has different skill sets that are transferable, maybe if this role isn't the best for them, there's another place for them in the company where they can actually thrive and do better. The other scenario is, right, that they're phased out over time. Now, there's one piece which is not related to people directly here, but there's some cases I've seen, and I've seen it pretty frequently, is that sometimes the failure to perform is not due to the person or to how the role is defined. It's due to the operational procedures and processes surrounding that role and not enabling it to succeed.
Yeah.
So that's also part of org structure and looking at this. So those are the things I would look at, and some of the considerations, very quickly and very briefly when looking at org structure and personnel.
Okay, good. All right, quick speed round.
Yes.
Book that's had a big impact on you.
Remote by Jason Fried. Love
So
it because
good.
I'm a big proponent of
Big fan of that book.
of it. Yeah, I loved it a lot because their company is one of the Basecamp is one of the companies that's been doing this for more than 20 years. So it's like a masterclass on how to do it right. So I love that book.
I've had Jason on the show. I love all of his books, and he's best piece of wisdom you've ever received.
Wow, that's a good one. One that I've gotten recently is always listen to feedback from everyone, but never let it influence how you do things based on your core values and thoughts.
Listen to your gut.
Yes, very, very powerful. Always understand everyone else's take and everyone else's opinions and so forth, but also don't be subject to changing your opinion based on the last person you talked to and the feedback pivoting all the time.
Yeah, I agree. Some people just they don't understand. You got to listen to your gut. Last question. Finish the sentence. One thing everybody can do today to get started on either getting HR in their business and or elevating HR to the next level within their company.
Subscribe to Organized Chaos, right?
Tell everybody in all seriousness who your ideal clients are.
Yeah, so ideal clients are startups that are starting to achieve some success. I'm talking 7-figure revenues plus early 7 figures, mid 7 figures, and who are planning on growing beyond that.
Yeah.
Companies that are planning to stay within that realm is not typically the type of client I work with, because the work I typically do is about how do I get you to that scalability that you want to get to? How do you blow to 8-9 figures and grow from there? And typically I work with two types of personas, if you want, two types of customer bases, either founders or HR people who are in these kinds of startups, but they're kind of stuck and aren't able to take that business to the next level, don't know where to go. So that's kind of where we come in.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you work and scale their businesses in HR. I work and scale businesses, working with them on sales and kind of business growth. And it's important that companies look at ways that they can scale. So I think it's great. I appreciate you taking time to be on today's show. Did you give everybody your website one more time?
Yeah, so website is organizedchaos.fyi.
It's great. And I'm Jon Dwoskin, jondwoskin.com. If you need anything about coaching, give me a buzz. Nahed, this was great. Thank you so much.
You too, John. Thanks. Pleasure for talking to you. Thank you.